I'm a filmmaker, and I sort of stumbled across information about nuclear weapons through the back door. I feel like when we think about nuclear weapons, we often think about them in the abstract, scientific invention that's very far away. The scale of a nuclear blast is so hard to conceive of. It's almost like trying to imagine 10 billion people or something. Like, it's something that it's just hard to almost wrap a human brain around. And then also like the small scale of, how the technology works, where you have an atom that's decaying, hitting another atom and another into this chain reaction. I think what really surprised me when I first started learning about nuclear technology and nuclear weapons development in the early days was how close to home it all actually was, and how kind of crude and tactile the processes were, uranium being a metal that's mined from the earth. So I came to the topic. I was home from grad school one winter, and I went to my friend's house for dinner, and her dad started talking about this field south of town in Ames, Iowa. That's where I'm from. That was contaminated with radioactive materials. I was really surprised because at the time I really didn't know much about the topic at all. I didn't know why there would be nuclear waste on a field, near Ames. It's sort of a serene college town. It's a pretty town, academic kind of place. I started asking questions and kind of talking to various people, and some of the older people in town would say, "Oh yeah, I heard that there was radiation emanating from the leaves of the trees in this woods," or, "Oh yeah, I heard that there's waste, there's a cancer cluster on this block." I started to gather bits and snippets of information, but it didn't all really come together until I met up with this man named Marv Anderson, who was a physicist who had worked for the Ames laboratory and was retired. He had had a stroke, but he was still remembered a lot about his career. And he started out by talking about these very technical processes. He said, that they purified 1,000 tons of uranium here that were in the bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, like here in Ames. I said, no, I didn't know that you could grow up in a town and not know that it had sort of played this huge role in weapons development. That is, in fact, what happened in Ames. They developed the first method of uranium processing. So uranium as a metal is usually attached to other metals in nature. You could only get it in a really small size, and they made it so that you could get it in larger quantities before it would then be sent to Oak Ridge to be enriched, which is where they separate out, usually I think through centrifuges, different isotopes so that you can get, because there's 235 and 238, and they need to find the fissionable isotope of uranium in order to make weapons. This uranium that was used in Ames, it came from Chad in Africa. It was mined at a mine called the Shinkolobwe mine.
Well, it was started in Ames in early 1942. Dr. Spedding was a very prominent chemist, and he was called upon by Dr. Compton in Chicago to see if he could get involved in a project.
Spedding had done work on rare earths, and Compton thought he wanted a chemist in charge of his chemistry department at Chicago who knew something about rare earths.
And we couldn't do it in Chicago until we built a building, until we got some staff together. And I told him that we had a metallograph and we had a furnace here at Ames, and that we could get some of this work going. Dr. Wilhelm had been the other man doing all the physical chemistry at Ames, and I approached him, and I knew his abilities pretty well, and asked him if he wouldn't join us. So that's the way we started.
They didn't know what they were going to get. They didn't know if anything would happen. They didn't. First time they made it go critical, they used a screwdriver, and they were moving the blocks close together.
The blocks of
uranium.
They moved them together with a screwdriver.
Yeah, to make them go critical.
What does that mean, critical?
When you put them together, you increase the radioactivity. Spedding and Wilhelm didn't know it would work. And
Just try different things, or?
oh yeah, well that's what research is. You take a little of this and a little of that, and you put it in the pot and cook it and see what happens.
Our country, is still making these weapons, as we've heard, as we know, and that it's incredibly careless and reckless, especially because they have absolutely no way to know where to put this stuff, right? Like, it was supposed to go to Yucca Flats, but New Mexico doesn't want that waste. They've already had so much of it. So where does the nuclear waste end up, right? Where do we put it? Not to mention, obviously, the disregard for human life, even just behind the idea of dropping a bomb on someplace.